The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
It's one of the stories I told at Hubbard Hall during the Iceland, when we did Iceland as a holiday. This is a story that's freely adapted, I have to say, from a story from Iceland. There was a man named John Arneson who was he was a museum curator and teacher and a custodian too, but he gathered all folk tales from around Iceland, and he was kind of the Hans Christian Andersen of Iceland, and is attributed to having collected these great old stories. So this one I adapted from a couple of the stories which I think had a common root, and then separated out into different stories, and I brought elements of them together and added my own stuff and a few things. It's called The Hidden Woman, and it goes like this. When Arnur came of age at the farm at the Rottafell in Iceland, he was given the task of guarding the sheep out on the green, grassy Icelandic plains. He loved the landscape. He loved to lie back and look up at the sun and the moon and the stars and just marvel at the mystery of life. But he was a friendly guy too, and he befriended everybody with an easy manner, open smile. There was, however, one woman with whom he found it difficult to engage conversation. Her name was Una, and she was a very short, very thin woman with a pale, pretty face and sad blue eyes. She had come to the farm 3 years before to help with the raking, and a rake seemed like it was touched by magic. She quickly did more work than anyone else. The farmer, whose name was Ger, took a liking to her and brought her in to manage the affairs of the farm. She always treated people with great respect, but always with this kind of distance. The young man Arnur would have accepted her somewhat distant friendship for what it was and let it go at that, except for the dreams. Every night on Christmas Eve, he would have the same dream. He would dream that he was floating and yet bound, that he was with friends who were enemies, that he was in a celebration but with great sadness, tears. He knew that these dreams had something to do with Una, but he knew not what. Well, this particular Christmas Eve, he decided to try to find out. He went to bed and lay awake in his bedclothes, feigning slumber. Now, this wasn't easy to do for a young man who'd been working in the fields all day, but he managed to pull it off. And that night, in the middle of the night, his door creaked open, and Una came into the room. She was carrying this strange bridle, like a horse's bridle. She walked over to the bed, climbed on his back, put the bridle over his head, tugged the reins, and he was lifted up and off and floated over the bed. The great window on the wall opened up, and they glided out into the Icelandic night. It was cold, but he was perfectly comfortable. She tugged the reins and turned him, and they headed west across Iceland. And as they glided along, and he could look down and see the roads winding through the hills like string around bales of hay. In the windows of the houses, he could see the faint flicker of late-night hearths. And in the distance, he could see the misted lens of the ocean. They glided along for a long time until she drew him to a mountain on the far west of Iceland, and she landed him in a barren upland reach next to a deep, steep ravine. She climbed off his back, went over the side of the ravine, and disappeared. Well, he tried to get up, but he found he couldn't move his arms and legs with the bridle on, but he managed to shake it off with his head and climbed up and looked down the ravine. And he saw that there was a set of little ancient stone steps going down into the ravine. And he could see Una down in the distance descending. Well, he started to follow her, but he kept his distance just in case she turned around. But she never did. And the two of them descended down into the bottom of the ravine. When he got there, he was startled to find himself in the middle of a strange little village. There were stone pathways leading through fruit orchards. And on the walls of the ravine, there were birch wood doors leading to cave dwellings. And up on the walls, he could see these tapestries with intricate designs of the sun and the moon and the stars and other shapes too, strange, beautiful shapes he'd never seen before. He was following Una, and he saw that she was heading towards a great big circle in the center of the village with a long table, and all the villagers clustered around it. So he slipped his way around behind some houses and some bushes until he found a rock near the table where he could watch everything close up. And when he got there, he saw that this was a village of the Holdu folk, the people that we call the Elves. Now, long ago, his mother had told him about the Elves. She said that it was said that in the Garden of Eden, Eve had been washing her children when God called them forth to be seen by him. Well, she hadn't finished washing them also. She only brought forth the ones for God to see that were cleaned. The other ones, unseen by God, were condemned to live their lives under rocks, in caves, and in distant villages far away from their cousins, the humans, who grew to look on the Elves with suspicion and mistrust. Here was a very gathering of those folks. And he could see on the table, he could see leaf bread and mutton stew. And he saw that this was a celebration of the Yule, of the great turning of the wheel of time that's celebrated during the holiday season. Well, now as Una approached the table, all of the townspeople stopped to look and stared at her. And then one stocky, bearded young elf walked up to her and put his arms around her and said, "Wife, it is so good to have you home again." And two little elves came up, and the four of them wrapped their arms around each other and embraced while the rest of the town looked on. The one exception to all this was a wizened old woman with yellow skin and crooked teeth who was tearing mutton off of a bone and eating and completely ignoring Una's arrival. But now, Una's husband took Una by the hand and led her over to the woman and said, "Mother," he said, "we understand your anger for us for getting married without your consent. And we understand that is why you condemned and put a curse on Una that she should live among humans for all of the year and only return to us for 1 night during the Yule. But she has suffered enough. The children have suffered enough. Mother, it is time for you to end this curse and let Una return to us for good." The old woman didn't even look up. "Why, son," she said, "Una knows, and you know, that she has the power to release herself from this curse. All she has to do is live among humans and be accepted by them, and the curse is lifted." "I have lived among humans for 3 years," said Una, "and they have accepted me well enough." "Yes, but as a Holdu folk? As an elf? Do they know what you really are? Have they accepted you as such?" "Kera is a very religious man," said Una. "He would never accept me. His family wouldn't accept me as an elf. He might have me imprisoned or worse. I would never see my children again." "Well," said the old woman, "you have chosen your fate, and there is nothing more that I can do about it." And she tossed away the bone, hitting the very rock behind which Arnor was hiding. Una looked at the old woman for a moment, and then she turned to her children and said, "Come, children, let us play while there's still time." Arnor decided not to follow the family as they went off to have some time for themselves, but stayed behind the rock and watched the feast, and then he saw then the sadness in the corners of everybody's eyes. One handsome young elf stood up and sang a beautiful, sweet elven song, and everyone was moved to tears. And then Nor decided that he'd better go back up in case Una would return and find him missing, so he decided to leave. But before he did, he reached over and grabbed the bone and put it in his pocket. And then he worked his way through the streets and climbed the stairs and went up and put the bridle over his head and waited for her to return. All too soon, Una trudged up the stairs slowly, climbed on his back, tugged the reins, and they glided off eastward across Iceland. She glided him into his window, landed him on his bed, took the bridle off, and she was just about to leave the room when Arnor jumped up and went, "Oh, Una, oh," he said, "Oh, I had such a strange dream. I dreamed that I was in a village of the Holdufolk, and I dreamed that you were one of them." "Well," said Una, "we cannot ever account for the strange imaginings that our dreams give us." "No," said Arnor, "no, and I would pay it no mind at all, except that you are in my room, and I have this in my pocket." And he pulled out the bone. "Well, now you know," said Una. "I'm sorry to have used you in such a way, but surely you see I have no choice. Ger is a very good man, but he's so religious. He and his family would never accept me for what I am. And so I am resigned to live the life that I am condemned to live." Arnor thought about it for a moment, and he said, "You know, Una, when that old woman made her curse, I don't believe she said how many humans must accept you. So it seems to me one lone man will do. When I first met you, I accepted you as a friend. When you kept your distance from me, I accepted you as a friend that was a kind of a wounded bird. But now that I saw what I saw, and I know what I know, I accept you as a friend and as a Holdufolk. So, you see, Una, the curse you were under has already been lifted. Go home. Go home to your family." Una looked at him for a moment, and then her pinched, drawn face broke open to this great big smile. It was for Arnor, it was the most magical thing he'd seen all night. "Thank you, Arnor, thank you," she said. "And listen, Arnor," she said, "soon you will be given the opportunity to change your life. When it comes, take it." And she kissed him lightly on the cheek, and she was gone. Well, in the morning, Ger and his family were surprised and disappointed to find a note from Una indicating that she had left the farm to return to her family and wishing them all a happy Christmas and farewell. Well, that night, Ger had a great big Christmas feast, and it was for Arnor. It was the most wonderful feast he'd had in a long time. First of all, because he'd solved the riddle of the dreams, but also because he knew that in another place, another kind of people were having their own kind of celebration with their own food and their own songs and their own wishes for a good new year to come. And that for one particular family, that wish was already coming true. And then there came a time a few weeks later when a visiting silversmith came to the farm and invited Arnor to come and apprentice. Well, remembering Una's words, Arnor complied. And over time, he became known throughout Iceland for his beautiful, beautiful silverwork, intricate designs of the sun and the moon and the stars, and other shapes as well, strange, intricate shapes. Shapes that were unknown to the mind, but somehow familiar to the heart. Thank you.
So, one of the things I try to do occasionally is combine folklore and personal story. And with the High Holy Days coming up soon, I decided I wanted to share this one with you. The folktale is from Eastern Europe. Once, a long time ago, somewhere in Eastern Europe, there lived a young shepherd boy. And he did not know the ways of reading and writing, but he was very wise in the ways of nature, and he loved God. And each day he would bring the sheep up to the pasture, and he was really good at that job. And when they were grazing, he would sit down on a moss-covered rock very often, and he would bring out his reed flute that he had made himself, and he would blow, and the music would be just incredible. Everything from the blade of grass to the angels to God would just smile at the music and the sincerity of his heart. Well, one day, when he was going to be a bar mitzvah, coming to the age of 13, his father decided he should go to the synagogue with him. And he was going to take him to the synagogue of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, very important person. And Yonatan, for that was his name, Yonatan, was so excited. He had heard the villagers talking, and he knew that this man had such fervor in his prayer, and he couldn't wait to go. And so he dressed in the coarsely handmade suit, and he went walking with his father. But before he left the house, unbeknownst to anybody, he took that reed flute and stuck it in his pocket. And as they walked, they went into the synagogue, and they tried to get as close as they could to the Baal Shem Tov. And the prayers began. And the Baal Shem Tov did, in fact, pray beautifully. And the people around were able to pray and respond in Hebrew. He did not know how to read. He wanted so much to pray in his way to the God he loved so much. Finally, late in the morning, he took his hand and he started to reach into his pocket. His father got wise to what he was doing, put his hand on his son's hand and said, No, you can't do that. Not here, not in this time, and not in this place. Music is forbidden on this day, this holy day of Yom Kippur. So he sat back and he listened to the people praying, and he wished again that he could pray in his way. Later on in the afternoon, he went and he did the same thing. He tried to get his flute. His father stopped him. And so the prayers went on. You know, on Yom Kippur, prayers go on all day long. It was getting near, the sun was beginning to wane, people were hungry, and it was getting close to the time when the Baal Shem Tov would finish the prayers, blow the final Tekiah Gedolah, the final blast of the shofar, and everybody could go home. But something strange happened. He seemed to lose some of the fervor. The prayer was going really slowly. Everybody was kind of looking around, and all of a sudden, that young boy, Yonatan, he took his hand, he pulled out the flute, and he blew a long, beautiful note. His father was horrified. But amazingly, at that very moment, the Baal Shem Tov seemed to be revived. He prayed with great fervor and quickly finished the service and blew the Tekiah Gedolah, and everybody started to go home. The father started to go to apologize for his son, and he saw the Baal Shem Tov was coming toward him. And he said, I'm sorry. Do not apologize for your son, said the Baal Shem Tov, for it was the sincerity and the heartfelt prayer of his praying in his way that made all of our prayers acceptable to God. And so that's the story And I always loved that story. But now it has so much more resonance for me. I realized I had to tell it when we celebrated this summer the 50th birthday of my son Jonathan. He was born in 1969 with Down syndrome. And in those days, people told us that, I remember the doctor saying, oh, maybe he'll be toilet trained, maybe he can speak. I don't know, he won't amount to very much. You might think about putting him in an institution. After all, you have a 2-year-old daughter, you have to think about her. Well, let me tell you, the 50 years of John's life have been incredible. He learned to ride a bike just like everybody else. He was in many Special Olympic events. About 20 years ago, he got a coach helped him, and he completed the New York City Marathon, which is something I could never do for sure. And he used to ride his bike to work. He owns his own condominium. He volunteers in many, many different ways. And he lives a full, productive life. But his chauffeur blowing, that really represents him in a special way. So when he was an older teenager, he had an opportunity to study with one of the leaders of our congregation and learn how to blow shofar. We took him down to New York City, to the Lower East Side, and he tried many different shofarot. This is one, so you can see. This is his, actually. It's a ram's horn, and it has a beautiful sound, but I can't blow it. So he wanted to study with this man, and every Sunday he went, and he studied the laws and the rules, and he studied the notes. Now, he does not read or write, so he and I worked out a color code so that he could, with lines and colors, so that he could blow the notes of the shofar. And then one year, he was ready, and he blew the shofar at the family service. And he did a perfect job. Now, it's very important. One of the great commandments of this day is to hear the shofar blowing, so it's very important that you hear it and you hear it correctly. And he did a beautiful job. The next year he did it again, and right afterwards, the head of our youth director, who also worked at Vassar College, came running down to John and said, "John, we need you." The student who was going to blow shofar at the Vassar College service didn't show up. And John said, "Well, I'll go." And he ran over with her. And here, this young boy who could not read or write allowed the students and faculty and families of Vassar College to hear the sound of the shofar. And he's blown it for many places, for people who are homeless, not homeless, homebound, for people in nursing homes. He was once even asked by my friend Reverend Gail Berger to blow at a peace concert, to open up the peace concert in front of at the Buddhist temple in front of the largest Buddha in the Western world.
There we go.
But for him, the biggest thing was when he was asked to blow the shofar in front of his congregation. And he was asked to blow that Tekiah Gadola, that final blow on Yom Kippur. I held my breath. Everybody else had smiles on their faces, and he blew a loud, clear note that went straight, I'm sure, to the throne of God. And as I looked around, once I took a breath, I saw tears in the eyes of some people, and I saw smiles in the eyes of many more. And Jonathan had the biggest grin ever. And so, that shepherd boy who couldn't read or write, his prayers made all the prayers go up to heaven. And that's the story.
Oh. This is Ghost Story. This is a story I wrote myself, and it's done in character, and it's called The Key. And it goes like this. A cold rain was falling and freezing into an icy grit as soon as it hit the pavement. There was just enough traction for driving, but just enough. I was drowsy when I left the lumber yard back where I worked, but a few miles back, my car had fishtailed, the rear end swinging into the icy ridge at the center line and then swinging over to the dirty sludge on the side of the road before I managed to straighten it out. After that, I was wide-eyed and white-knuckled, all my concentration going into the feeling of the steering wheel and the feeling of the tires on the road. It was way too early in the storm for any sand trucks. I had to get home before the road iced up entirely. There had already been enough wreckage on this stretch of highway for one season. Masterson Road's a pretty empty stretch of highway. Aren't too many farms or businesses on it, but about halfway home, I passed the Pioneer Tavern. It's Smitty's place to us locals. I just kept going, though I didn't go in. I hadn't been in since that night 3 weeks before when I did something I figured cost the life of my neighbor Ralph. Smitty's had been about half crowded that night. There was some kind of hopeless Knicks game going on three of the big wide screens and some poker thing on the other one. Ralph and I were sitting at a corner table. I was nursing a dark beer. He was knocking down highballs, big tall glasses with ripples on the sides. On the table in front of us was the key to his pickup truck. It was a big old Chevy key on a chain with a couple of pink dice. He was going on about his wife, how Helena shouldn't have been driving the truck that day, how she shouldn't be driving the truck at all, how women were terrible drivers in general. The truck was an old bare bones pickup from back in the day when trucks were just good, solid workhorses instead of the expensive mobile offices they've become today. It had belonged to his son Wesley. Wesley had banged out all the dents, puttied it up, painted it baby blue, put a little bit of white trim on the corner fenders, put in leather upholstery and a big chrome gear shift and a big old Hemi engine too. Wesley did all this when he was a teenager. And then Wesley went away to Iraq, came back in a box. After that, Ralph took to driving the pickup truck himself. Took to drinking heavily, too. Well, that night as he went on about his wife, I knew enough to keep quiet about it. I knew that she was the one in the family with no points on her license. Besides, I knew that this whole talk about who gets to drive the truck was just some kind of realignment after the death of their son. It spoke of guilt and anger and recriminations that I wasn't in any position to judge. It's kind of like listening to an argument in a foreign language, except I was only hearing half the argument, and that was Ralph, and he was drunk. Well, something must have happened in the Knicks game because this old farmer named Rex, who was sitting at a bar at a stool at the bar, started screaming obscenities at the TV screen. Well, Ralph pulled his chair back and turned around to see what was going on and knocked over his drink, and whiskey and ice spilled all over the table. So I jumped up and I grabbed the key to get it out of the way and some napkins. I started cleaning up. Ralph pushed back and bumped into a big burly guy in a green t-shirt I'd never seen before, glared at both of us. And Ralph looked down at his wet lap and he said, "Well, I guess that about does it for me. Now where is that key?" I held it up and I said, "I think I better drive you home, cowboy." "Drive me home," he says. "I don't need you to drive me home. I got my son's pickup truck. Now give me the key." "I'm going to keep you out of trouble," I said. "Keep me out of trouble," he says. "You're going to get me in trouble. Now give me the key. Give me the goddamn key." Heads were turning. I was tired. I mean, he'd done the ride 100 times. I held the key and I squeezed the dice for a minute. And then I handed it over to him. "Be careful," I says. "Always," he says. Well, I figured I'd leave too, drive along with him, keep my eye on him as he's going home. But then he headed over to the bar for another round. And I just left in disgust. Masterson Road follows this valley, the railroad grade for a while, and then it curves up through the hills up to the little village where Ralph and I both lived. About 200 yards up, it makes a sharp right turn in the face of a wall of shale. Ralph wasn't the first person to miss that turn, but the history of bad decisions didn't matter. He was still just as dead when his pickup truck smashed into the wall. The truck was still smoking when the EMT guys got there and realized there wasn't any point in hurrying any longer. Must have been hard for them. They were friends of Wesley's. They'd known Ralph all their life. But they kept it out of their voices when they told me about it the next day. Kept it out of their voices, but not out of their eyes. I felt a kinship for them, you know. I felt, I guess, what a lot of family members and friends feel when an alcoholic dies that way. You know, you feel like that there's one thing, one goddamn thing you could have done to stop it. Except I was blessed and cursed with knowing what I thought it was. I could have kept that key, I thought. Ralph would still be alive today. Well, now on this night, 3 weeks later, I felt the rear end of my car swing a little bit again, and I realized there was no room in my mind for these recriminations that had been cycling through my head for the last 3 weeks. I just had to keep my mind on my driving. Well, the road had been empty up until then, but now I saw a couple of headlights in the rearview mirror coming up behind me, swaying slightly, driving too fast, coming up behind me too quick. Well, I resisted the urge to speed up, and I started looking for a place to maybe pull over. The side of the road was kind of dropped off gradually. It was doable, but I might get stuck. I looked behind me again. The headlights were coming up real fast. There was no choice, so I turned the wheel. But I must have turned it too quickly because suddenly my car fishtailed around again, the rear end swinging into the oncoming lanes. I felt this surge of hopeless panic as my car spun around like a carnival ride and then jerked to a stop. I was sideways across the road. I looked out my driver's side window and I could see the headlights bearing down on me. There was no time to get out of the way. I froze. And then in the last second before impact, I saw that it was the baby blue pickup with Ralph at the wheel, and then he was passing through me like a cold wind and a deep pang of regret. And then outside my passenger window, I saw the lights blink once and then drive off in the distance and disappear around the curve. All this before I knew none of this could have happened. I just kind of went out of myself for a minute. And then when I came around, I realized my feet were still pressed down on the brake and the clutch. I turned the key and the engine made a little scritch and I realized it was still running. Pulled the car over the side of the road and just sat for a minute. I felt like I was in the moment right after I gave Ralph the key. I felt like I just wanted to just go back a minute. Go back in the moment before I gave it to him. But I couldn't. Too late. I got on the car and got on the road again and started driving again. I began to wonder if Ralph would be waiting for me up at that curve in the road. I kind of knew that he would be. And sure enough, when I got to the curve, there was the ghost of the baby blue pickup truck smashed into the wall of shale. Well, I got out of the car and walked over to take a closer look. The ghost of that wreckage was brutally real. The hood was all folded up and you could see bits of shale caught in the creases. The fenders were chipped and Bondo was showing through. The windshield was bloody spider web. Passenger window was completely gone. So I went over and I looked in. And there was Ralph, his back to me, his hunched over, a big reddish-brown stain on his denim coat. I just stared at him, waiting to see what would happen. You know, would he ask me why I gave him the key? Would he scream at me? Would he yell at me? Would he laugh? I mean, what the hell does it matter what he does anyway? He was a drunk. What the hell does it matter what a drunk does? It mattered to me, though. But the ghost of the corpse just remained silent and still. And then I noticed something. In the dim light on the floor below the passenger seat, I could see the Chevy key on the chain with the pink dice. So I looked in the ignition. And there was another key on a ring with 7 or 8 other keys and a Harley medallion. I thought about it, and then I realized what had happened. The key on the chain with the pink dice was his wife's key. He said she'd been driving a pickup truck that day. She must have got in or got out, and he got in without taking it out. That's why he had it that night. But he had his own key, only in his pocket or whatnot. And he would have driven off whether I gave him the key or not. So I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him. And maybe that's why he appeared to me this night, just to let me know it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. I just stood there for a moment, and then I just said, "Thanks, Ralph. Thanks." And then I went back to my car and got in. When I turned around to look again, the ghost of the baby blue pickup truck was gone. Well, the icy rain had turned to snow by now, but I drove real careful the rest of the way home. You know, I think that was probably Ralph's last gift to me, was a demonstration of what could happen if I was reckless with my driving. I thought if I was ever in that situation again, I would hold on to that key no matter what kind of recriminations came to me from across the table. But I guess I also knew that an alcoholic will always find a bottle and a key, and sometimes a wall of shale to smash it into. When I got home, my wife was cooking dinner. Went up the steps into the kitchen and just put my arms around her, and I just held her until she finally realized that I was really and truly home again. Thank you.
So había una vez, vivía 3 mariposas hermosas. Once upon a time, there lived 3 butterflies. There was but one butterfly with big red wings, alas rojas. And there was a medium-sized butterfly with yellow wings, alas amarillas. And there was a little butterfly with little white wings, alas blancas. And the 3 of them were best friends. They lived together in the hollow of a tree, and they flew. They would fly each day over the meadow, over the grass, and into the flower garden. And in that flower garden, there were beautiful flowers of all colors. The mariposas, the butterflies, loved those flowers. They loved to see them, they loved to smell the wonderful scents, and they loved to suck the nectar. One day they were having so much fun, they forgot to look up in the sky. A dark cloud was coming, and it started to rain. The raindrops came onto the wings. The butterflies didn't know what to do. They needed to get out, and they flew over the flower garden and said, "Please, please shelter us from the storm. Inside your petals, it's nice and warm." And a red tulip opened up its petals and turned to la mariposa roja, the red butterfly, and said, "You can come in, you're like me. But your friends, they're different. I don't like different. They may not come in." And that red butterfly just stood right up and said, "I am not going where my friends are not welcome. Muchas gracias, pero no gracias. Thanks, but no thanks." And she flew away with her friends. Now their wings were getting heavier and heavier as the rain was coming down faster and faster and faster. "Who will shelter us from the storm? Inside your petals, it's nice and warm." A yellow tulip opened up its petals, looked around at the three mariposas and said, "Yellow one, you can come in, you're like me. But your friends, I don't like different." So she got up and she said, "I will not go where my friends are not welcome. Gracias, pero no gracias. Thank you, but no thanks." And she went on, and now the rain was coming down really hard. Their wings were really, really heavy. They could barely move. And again they said, "Who will shelter us from the storm? Inside your petals, it would be nice and warm." A white lily opened its petals and looked around. "White one, you can come in. I don't like different. You guys have to stay outside." And you know what happened. She said, "I will not go where my friends are not welcome. Gracias, pero no gracias. Thank you, but no thanks." And so they didn't know what they were going to do, and they were barely able to move when they heard a voice from the side, a little clover patch. And from there they heard, We see that you friends are sticking together. We don't have big flowers to offer you, but if you come to us, you can hide under our flowers until the storm blows over." And so the mariposas, the butterflies, they went under those little flowers, and the sun shone down. It saw how the friends stuck together. It saw how the clover welcomed them all, and the sun pushed that dark cloud away and shone brightly, and the mariposas climbed up the clover, and their wings, the warmth of the sun dried their wings, and the three of them flew back to their tree. And from then on, every day they still went out, and they still went to the flowers, and they still flew around and enjoyed the colors and the smells and the nectar. But they always remembered to go visit the clovers. And if you ever want to see butterflies to this day, if you go to patches of clover, you will see those butterflies, and you will remember how the butterflies stuck together and how the clover was kind to them all. And that's the story.
Oh.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round